Good afternoon. Thanks very much for coming. I vividly remember seeing on the evening of November the 2nd, 1982, for the very first time, the iconic Channel 4 logo invented by Martin Lambinan, the four coming together in colorful symmetry and indeed perfectly symbolizing the early mission of Channel 4. Put on TV stuff that hadn't been allowed before, reveal new voices, and smash the BBC and ITV's quiet complacency. It was a mission of incredible clarity in a much simpler and way more binary world. 30 years on, Britain is a very different place, at least in part, I would argue, because of Channel 4. And television has been revolutionized by hyper-competition. From 3 channels, who can believe it, in 1982 to 300, or maybe 3,000 today, who can count? And then there's the small matter of what George W. Bush memorably called the interwebs. The questions about Channel 4, though, have been remarkably consistent over those 30 years. Is it distinctive enough? Is it too loud? Can it survive? I wrestled with those questions as Channel 4's 3rd chief executive from 1997 to 2001. David Abraham is CEO number 6. He's been at the helm for 2.5 years, and I'm genuinely curious to find out what it's like to have my old job more than a decade on. In a moment, I'm going to talk to David, but first, he's going to give his vision of Channel 4 in 2012.
Thank you very much, Michael. Well, for a generation that had always lived with digital television, the internet, and mobile, it's perhaps difficult to comprehend the impact that the arrival of Channel 4 had on those people like myself who were teenagers in 1982. I'd grown up with a paternalistic form of television at the center of my life. But as I went through adolescence, it seemed increasingly disconnected from the world around me, a more angular world of punk, drugs, Thatcher, the Falklands War, mass youth unemployment. Into my world arrived Channel 4. And from the first night, it was clear that those like Anthony Smith and Jeremy and Michael, who'd lobbied Channel 4 into existence, had succeeded in creating a space in all our lives that felt both different and more in tune with the world we were experiencing. This wonderfully contemporary, messy creation spoke with a powerful and authentic voice. It felt both entertaining and serious. It had a sense of mission, but also mischief. For a second time in my lifetime, TV was going from black and white into color. Rebellion was part of what I liked about 4, but it was rebellion of quite a focused variety. It had the courage to address issues and say things in a way that I'd simply not seen on television before. The post-war world that we'd grown up in still seemed very hemmed in by so many taboos and cultural hierarchies. But Channel 4, with shows like Walter and Comic Strip, was prepared, indeed compelled, from its very first night, via its remit, to challenge that status quo in creative and iconoclastic ways. Now, what I didn't know at that time was that the creative edge sprang, in part, from a very enlightened and entrepreneurial approach towards how the shows were actually made. In 1982, the creation of Channel 4 quite simply liberated the means of production from the duopoly of the BBC and ITV. That's what's driven the diversity of the schedule and of the points of view within the programmes. Channel 4 felt like it had a knack of nurturing talent, ideas and ways of seeing that were bubbling away at the borders of society and bringing them centre stage. In a very real sense, it seemed to accelerate that thing which I felt, as the child of post-war immigrants, was central to the way that British society has always progressed, in that it had always been open to new ideas, to difference, to cultural progress. This is why, for me, running Channel 4 today is quite simply one of the most special jobs in the world. My passionately held belief is that everything which Channel 4 does well remains as important now as it was 30 years ago, in spite of all the changes that have occurred in the world around us and in the broadcasting landscape, despite multi-channel, despite the WOC, the terms of trade, despite Sky and Virgin and the rise of the super indie. So let me explain why. One of the greatest strengths of British culture is that it is in constant flux, illustrated wonderfully by Danny Boyle's Olympic opening, a diverse, chaotic world, unified by a quirkiness and a permissiveness and an enduring creativity. Created by a man whose films were nurtured by Film 4, from Shallow Grave and Trainspotting through to Slumdog Millionaire. To capture the flux takes both a certain kind of intellectual rebellion, so as to sit outside mainstream thought, and an appetite for risk. A remit that compels you to do this helps too. Of course, many taboos have been broken since 1982, but new, more pervasive challenges constantly confront every new generation. Let's just take one example. Online deception and cruelty amongst the young, the subject of several stunning recent True Stories documentaries. And this was unheard of back in Michael Braid's day. In a moment, you will see a video montage of 30 years of Channel 4, and I'm terrifically proud of the quality of the ideas that have emerged in this early post-Big Brother era. I cannot think of a more subversive and challenging set of contemporary dramas on British television in the past 12 months than Charlie Brooker's award-winning Black Mirror trilogy, which dared to confront celebrity television, politics, and the internet with a potency that matches anything in Channel 4's history. Or any movie that could equal Steve McQueen's Shame for its power in addressing the modern-day problem of addiction. Or anything recently said about contemporary British taste and art more intelligent than Grayson Perry. Or any major network that still covers as much depth of award-winning international news in prime time as Channel 4 News. Or any broadcaster in the world who would attempt to do what we're going to do tomorrow night, broadcast a live all-night DJ set for 6 hours into our viewers' living rooms. Now, since the last Edinburgh TV Festival, Channel 4 has also boldly brought large audiences to fresh issues, such as the crisis of multiculturalism in Make Bradford British, mental health in the workplace in the Channel 4 Goes Mad season, community banking in Bank of Dave, disabled dating in The Undateables, and transgender lives in My Transsexual Summer. The forthcoming Paralympic Games will, we hope, create a new and wider audience for Paralympic sports and a lasting legacy in terms of public attitudes. This is not, as some might argue, political correctness for its own sake. This is about directing the creative potential of television towards stimulating progress and change. Now, Channel 4, of course, today is navigating through the toughest and the longest recession in its history. That's why this autumn we are dedicating several big blocks of programming towards youth unemployment and addressing how the modern state can get captured by corporatism in the drama coup. We'll also be launching what we hope in time will become a returning fundraising franchise, Stand Up to Cancer. Now, this kind of programming matters to me. I spoke earlier about the cultural duopoly of the 60s and 70s that Channel 4 helped to break up. Today, in the midst of this long recession, we might have a subtler but no less pervasive kind of duopoly emerging, that of integrated technology and content platforms confronting centrally controlled, state-funded broadcasting, or voluntary pay television versus involuntary, as it could be described. Channel 4, with its independence, its commitment to its remit, its peerless brand attributes, and its £600 million content budget, is here to guard against the power of such a duopoly. Television as a medium fails to achieve its potential for real cultural impact when, for example, it's either nostalgia on a mass scale, as so much mainstream television remains, or it's reaching only tiny audiences at a time, as with so much original digital content right now. Proliferation of channel and platform choice has led, if anything, to more of the same, rather than variety of ideas in television. Fragmentation of audiences, combined with the binding of platform and content ownership, risks stifling the transmission of new ideas rather than strengthening it. The ecosystem still needs a creative counterweight, and that counterweight is Channel 4, a place that will be a source of inspiration, guidance, and assistance in a world characterized by economic turmoil and profound social change, as well as a haven for escapism, of course, as we are right now with our funny fortnight season. This is one reason why Jay Hunt and I have redoubled our efforts over the past 2 years to engage with as wide a range of creative partners from throughout the UK and from as many new sectors of the creative economy as possible. We believe that diversity of supply is one of the best guarantors of diversity of thought. Tomorrow, Jay and the commissioning team, for example, will be throwing open the doors at a speed dating session. And one of the other many wonders of the Channel 4 model is that our independence comes from the fact that our content is funded by advertisers who value the quality and the uniqueness of the editorial environment that we and you as producers provide to them. And now, technology increasingly connects brand owners directly to their customers. To respond to this, we have re-engineered our approach to ad sales, moving away from a less relevant and singular focus on share towards accurately valuing engagement and outcome. This is not some theoretical dream. This is happening today, and it plays to our natural strengths and is generating significant new opportunities for Channel 4. At the heart of our approach is a new viewing relationship platform, which in 18 months has already attracted 5 million individually identified viewers actively engaging with Channel 4 and its products, of which there are an increasing number, whether 4OD, 47, Scrapbook, or our suite of award-winning content-related applications such as the £1 Million Drop Live game, now over 1 million downloads, Sexperience, and Dispatches. In the process, we have been blending our skills as content commissioners with those of product developers. To focus the value of these experiences, we have also recruited a new team of data analysts from outside broadcasting who are now busy mapping audiences using powerful tools unavailable to us just 5 years ago. The platform will provide us with ever deeper creative insights into how viewers engage with different parts of our genre offering and help us to shape ever more personalized and refined experiences both for them, for producers, and for advertisers. My vision is that this new engagement layer will ultimately form the basis of a renewed civic engagement with public service broadcasting in the 21st century. Not, as Michael once feared, a juju stick with which to defend a position of undoubted privilege, but a revolutionary way to focus viewer engagement to directly support a particular breed of British originality and creative endeavour, to continue to take the risks that others dare not take. All funded by the natural affinity of the audience towards the 4 brand, rather than through restrictive paywalls or the threat of criminal fines. By harnessing the potential of connected television in the way that we've begun to do, we plan for this deeper message to become part of everything that reinforces and expands the public's understanding of why we're here and what we are here for. A creative agent of change as potent in the next 30 years as it has been until now.
Amazing trial. So I arrived at Channel 4 from the comparative vastness of the BBC. And I guess what most surprised me about the channel was how, for want of a better word, fragile it was. One channel, pretty much one revenue stream. And it struck me that one maladroit chief executive could tank the entire enterprise. What most surprised you about Channel 4 when you first got the job?
Well, as someone who, as I said, who grew up with it and was a fan of it, I was in awe of it. And when I arrived, I think the channel had gone through a period of a year or two when its self-confidence had been somewhat lost. And
the sort of swagger that I expected to see creatively was it kind of needed to be kind of revitalized. But I think rather like you, I arrived at a time when there was a lot of change. There was a lot of sort of generational change in lots of departments, and that needed to be settled over quite a long period of time. I think we're now at the point where we're starting to see the real flourishing of that sort of new turn of the dial coming through. So I think it was the difference in the sort of perceived confidence of an organisation from the outside versus what it felt like on the inside.
Right. So I've been living outside the UK for just over a decade, and I see, whenever I come back, I see incredible changes in Britain just in those 10 years. Maybe some of the most intense changes in my lifetime. And listening to your opening remarks, I suspect you have similar thoughts. And I wanted to ask you what you think is good and bad about Britain in 2012, and how that informs your sense of what Channel 4's mission should be now.
Well, by comparison to the late 90s, we are not in a sort of buoyant, optimistic era of British history at all. We're in a nervous, prolonged recession. But looked at from a positive point of view, we are in a much more open culture than I think maybe we were a decade ago. I think the point at which you left the UK and Diana died, that was a point at which maybe the tone of the country began to change. And I think we've seen that very strongly in these Olympics that we've just enjoyed.
Big Brother plus Princess Diana equals Danny Boyle's opening ceremony, or something.
Something along those lines. But I think there's a flip side to that, because obviously the power of the internet to open up society to itself has been very profound, particularly amongst the young. So I think sort of self-expression within society is far more open, but then I think there are new responsibilities that emerge around what do we want to do with that openness, and I think that's where Channel 4 can play a very big role through revealing society to itself in a way that has a purpose. And my own sense as a parent of teenage and young adults is that the media is a far more potentially dangerous place for people's inner minds and how they feel about the world than we have yet realised, and that media can do a lot to promote a positive vision of society and do so in a very creative way.
While thinking about this session, I made, as you would expect, a few calls to find out what people were thinking about Channel 4 now. And no surprise perhaps, but people loved your optimism about Channel 4. They like the fact that senior management at Channel 4 is no longer like an episode of The Borgias. But almost uniformly, people had difficulty coming up with strong impressions, positive or negative, of Channel 4. It's almost as if Channel 4 wasn't quite at the center of their thinking. How do you react to that?
Well, I think it's ever been thus. I think really the brand is nothing more than an expression of what's going out at any moment in time. And the power of the work that the independent production industry, create with us defines where the impact is. And the brand sits behind that. And for me, obviously, we've got a much more varied schedule now than we have done for over a decade. We've gone through that very big debate about the big oak tree called Big Brother, and we've come out the other side of it. And my sense is that Channel 4 now is truer, perhaps, to how it was before you brought Big Brother in, because it is by definition a much more diverse experience. It is still a place where one-off documentaries can have real impact. It's still a place where we can experiment with short-run dramas. We have less of our schedule tied up than ever before, and that makes it very interesting. Now, if you speak to advertisers, they like that because we attract light viewers, discerning viewers who are coming to watch particular shows. And the level of engagement with watching a show like the show we put out the other night about the Queen's mother-in-law, for example, will stand in people's memories for far longer in a week's viewing than maybe just watching a standard soap. So I would question whether or not we need to be institutionally loud. What matters is the work and the impact and the cultural impact that the work is having, and whether it's across our genres or in the Film 4 area where we go from strength to strength. I think the projects that we're backing have immense cultural impact, and that's, I think, culminating next week with the launch of the Paralympics.
I guess one of the fundamental changes, and in particular for the core Channel 4 young audience, is that the brand, you know, when I was running Channel 4 was the premium youth brand in entertainment and information. Today, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, there's so much competition way beyond television for the mind and the engagement of particularly that younger audience. I mean, that's a problem, isn't it, for Channel 4?
It's a challenge, but you know, some of those behaviours we can swim with and work with and make them part of the experience of watching our shows. But I would say we're doing different things. You know, young people are still watching a lot of video content on different platforms, admittedly, but television still has a huge impact on their lives. And thanks to you, we have E4, which probably is amongst young people the sort of most central television brand. It's certainly the one with the biggest audience share amongst young people, and with an attitude that speaks to the experiences that they are going through. So, I mean, my son's in his early 20s now, and I think every generation attaches themselves to certain shows at certain moments in their lives. I mean, I remember My Beautiful Laundrette because I'd just come to London, and the explosion of all of those discussions about race and sexuality felt incredibly new. So I think we somewhat can only judge Channel 4's power retrospectively. Mm-hmm. And I think certainly the research that we do suggests that the brand has incredible potency with young people through all of the various platforms that it now operates. And you've got to remember, behaviourally, as young people are watching more and more online, 4OD has become an amazing success story for us. And credit should go to the prior management team for creating that brand, which is now the leading commercial long-form video platform in the UK, and it's one that advertisers are really responding enthusiastically to.
Right. So just thinking of the purpose of Channel 4, the core purpose, as I remember myself, so much effort goes into keeping the show on the road, keeping the share alive, that sometimes the harder things can get squeezed. And I just wanted to give one example from the entire history of Channel 4 and get your reaction. When Jeremy began Channel 4, it was packed full of independent movies, world cinema, incredible cornucopia of stuff that had never before been seen on television. Over the years, that got squeezed to the edge of the schedule. Then it got removed from the main schedule. Then Film 4 Channel came along, and suddenly that was a kind of film buff's paradise. Then there was the need for share from the multi-channel offering. So Film 4 Channel became a more middle-brow affair. Commercials got cut into the movies. Is that a little parable of some, not all, but some of the story of Channel 4 over the last 30 years?
Partially. But I think what Jay and I would rather see is a thought-provoking piece of public service television in the heart of prime time that deals in a different way with those original purposes. Perhaps not as highbrow or as cerebral as television was 30 years ago, because it was a more hierarchical and paternalistic structure. Part of what Channel 4 has done to change that. But I would say that the innate attempt at intelligence and thoughtfulness in the programming is as strong now as it has ever been. And I think it's reflected in, you know, the success we're having with shows like Make Bradford British or The Undateables that can get big audiences to come to really big issues in a way that's very, very creative. And I think that's probably where we judge ourselves, our aspirations to be, there is always a role for perhaps a serious long-form documentary that appeal to a smaller audience, and people will come to that. And those are art forms which we respect, and we have various strands like random acts, which provide a platform for many of those things. True Stories has now come from More 4 onto the main channel. So we work very hard to bring those into the limelight. It's not a process of sort of endless pragmatism by any means. The heart of our job is the attempt to maximize the delivery of the purpose, but at the end of the day, at the end of every week, we have to bring the money in, and that's a real key discipline, as you know, when you're trying to deliver a public purpose. And I think, for me, that's something to really celebrate. It's a miracle that Channel 4 continues to have the footprint that it does 30 years on without imposing itself on the taxpayer at all. It is owned by all of us, but it is earning its keep whilst delivering these public purposes. And I think, so I'm not so sure whether I would describe the last 30 years as a process of sort of endless compromise.
I vividly remember the culture minister of the time, Tessa Jowl, ringing me to berate me about Brassai, although I'm not sure that she knew that it was a parody. Have you had any ministerial or indeed prime ministerial calls of that kind?
Well, we've had prime ministerial compliments about the Sri Lanka documentary and the Paralympics and various other things that we have done recently. But no, there have been some uncomfortable moments. And I think when the remit tells you to push the risk-taking and to provoke debate, and yet at the same time, as a responsible broadcaster, one has to balance that out with taking care, you find yourself in quite complex situations. And I think, again, the environment is so much more different than it was 30 years ago with the amount of feedback loop that exists, particularly from interest groups who recognise that television still has immense power to influence opinion. I like to describe what we do as controlled explosions. We know when we are going to provoke a reaction. We are always doing it with the intention of provoking thought. We don't always get it right. When this is your remit, you can't get it right all the time. And if you try to, you're probably not trying hard enough. But I think there is a recognition, because of the scale of Channel 4, with its 10 or 11% footprint, that it should try and push things in a way that the BBC, with its different responsibilities and its bigger footprint, perhaps still can't. I mean, mummifying a taxi driver, crashing a plane, doing a drama that is based on the premise of a prime minister fucking a pig, these aren't particularly comfortable editorial decisions, as you can imagine.
I know people worry about pigs.
Especially me, I'm Jewish.
Paralympics is particularly impressive because it's bold, it's dominating the schedule. You've obviously gone into it with a lot of conviction. It's like Big Brother in the sense that it's going to define the schedule for a period of time. Is that kind of event a new direction for your Channel 4?
Well, it's clearly utterly unique in that it's London, it's 2012, and it won't come around again. We certainly have looked at sport as you did, with fresh eyes. As you know, we recently acquired the rights to broadcast all of British racing, following in the tradition that horse racing that you established. And we are, we're obviously very excited about the Paralympics. So I think the other aspect of this, which goes back to sort of our remit, is that we saw it as an opportunity to do, to change attitudes and to change minds around disability. And I think, there's been an incredible program of training a whole new generation of disabled presenters. And that, again, obviously plays very much to the core
But should
purposes.
people, suppliers, be thinking the big event, the thing that takes over the channel, you're up for those things.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I think we're going to be launching our first, I think, in our history, really big telethon in the autumn for Stand Up to Cancer, which you'll be familiar with as a US initiative that
is Jerry Lewis available?
I'm not sure. I think we have a special edition of The Simpsons, which is coming. But the Cancer Research UK are going to do that with us, and there'll be some announcements shortly about the amazing array of talent that's getting involved. And I think this speaks probably a little bit to a sense that Jay and I had that Channel 4 had become perhaps a little bit aloof from its audience. There was a sort of strain of kind of detachment from the public and from various constituencies. And so we asked ourselves, well, what's wrong in us doing a telethon? We'll do it in an incredibly Channel 4 way. And it'll be a big roll of the dice for us. It'll be a lot of hours, but it's like the Paralympics, something that can really move the dial. I think, to your earlier point, when you're you've got to think, as you know, Big Brother was what 200 hours, 250 hours. You can't just literally replace all that overnight. You have to there's a prolonged period of experimentation. And what's wonderful, and Jay will be on, I think, later on this afternoon, is that 2/3 of the highest rating shows of this year are new titles. So we're getting to the returning franchises, Friday Night Dinner, Phone Shop,
right.
These, Top Boy, these things are coming back. And I think that's when you're starting to get a sense of, okay, now we're getting some pattern.
You just mentioned Top Boy, it's coming back.
Yeah.
4 episodes. And I just want to reflect on drama a second. As you know, in America, the key dramas are totally channel-defining things. Homeland, The Wire, Mad Men. You make one of those and you can transform the brand of a channel. And Channel 4 over the years has had various sporadic attempts, including under me, at trying to find a returnable drama. Shameless, I suppose, is the best example. But isn't it time for a really concerted effort to make drama that really becomes the absolute returnable center of what Channel 4 is?
In an ideal world, yes. And I think if the ad market was booming again, I think we would be in a stronger position to place that bet now. But it's not like we're not experimenting. So fresh meat, I predict, will be around for some time. And there are a lot of things in the pipeline.
But how many of those are you doing?
Well, there's another half dozen, I think 8 coming very soon. So these franchises can be built, but as you know better than I, we also have sort of kind of low attention span in the creative community here in the UK, and that we want to keep trying new things. And us and the BBC, I think, partly in delivering our remit, we want to give a lot of opportunities to a lot of people and a lot of writers and a lot of companies. Otherwise, you're saying no a lot more than you're saying yes, because everything's going into one thing. So we have this dilemma that we try and balance out. But absolutely, we, like everyone, would like franchises to return. But in the meantime, Homeland's coming back in a few weeks' time. The trailer looks unbelievable.
Can't wait.
There's two or three big drama franchises which are now coming back. And there's a good slate of new dramas that our new head of drama, Piers Wenger, has just greenlit. So we've got Sean Durkin doing Southcliffe, which will be very exciting. Utopia by Dennis Kelly will come in the new year. That is looking stunning. So I think you're going to see now, there's been a little hiatus, and now there's a big wave coming.
Okay, just moving on to entertainment. It's always been a dicey genre for Channel 4. I mean, I suppose Channel 4's greatest ever embarrassment was Mini Pops. I guess the person who got it right most of all was Chris Evans in a couple of different incarnations. One show that I did see recently, £1 Million Drop, just felt like a straightforward kind of sub-ITV thing. Why does it belong on Channel 4?
I have been asked this question before. We're very proud of the show for a number of reasons. I mean, not least Davina is, part of the family, and I think she's brilliant in it. But actually what that show represents is a genuine innovation in form, because it was the first time that it was possible for the audience to interact in a deep way simultaneously at home. And about a third of the audience now, when that show is on, are playing along live with an app at home. And the feedback loop between what's going on at home, what's going on in a live studio is, I think, pointing towards an evolution of where television is going. So it might appear on the surface to have many of the attributes of a conventional game show, but I think there's something going on there which is very new, and it's being reflected.
Your point is, look to see how that's applied in the future.
Partly, but also if you look at the remit, it says experiment in the form. Now, I would also say that Endemol, having sold that, I think, to 45 countries, we've also done our bit to take a creative risk and create some IP which has been exported around the world, and that's all. We also have to bear in mind aspects of the remit that are about, taking those creative risks that can then be developed more broadly. And we all know how challenging it is for all broadcasters to develop these formats, and that's one that has really been a great success.
Right, well, thinking of independence, Jimmy Mulville, he's described Sky as the new Channel 4. And of course, Sky really are fighting what you might call asymmetrical warfare, like HBO. They're not reliant on ratings, they're reliant on reputation, they're reliant on perception. And of course, they have a very, very big checkbook. Are they essentially almost frightening competition?
Well, I think it's a very good thing that Sky committed to spending much more on original content. However,
you don't really believe that, do you?
Well, I genuinely do. I genuinely do, because when your job is to say no a lot, it's quite good there's someone else saying yes.
As long as they buy the stuff you don't want.
Well, there's that too. In reality, I think this is about going back to purposes. What is it? The nature of the things that we are commissioning, and we don't feel we are competing really for the kinds of ideas that we think we want to put on the air with Sky.
But I suppose what I'm getting at is, I think I could imagine being kind of pissed off in your position. You have to pay your way. You've got one source of revenue. You have to get an audience. You have to fulfill the remit. Sky can buy stuff expensively. They don't really care if anyone watches. It just needs to look good. That's a tough competitor, right?
It's all down to the quality of the work, isn't it? I mean, I would only care if they were running something that I really desperately wanted on the channel. And at the moment, we feel we have...
Like Homeland Series 3 or...
Right now, I think that's staying at Channel 4. People said to me, how will you compete in the acquisition market? Well, I think Jay and her team have done an amazing job in finding things that I think the market naturally knows would work best with us and are not likely to work elsewhere, because of the pervasive power of what a channel brand represents to the viewer. But no, honestly, a lot has been said about the aggression with which Sky are investing in original content. I think it is a good thing, but genuinely, just to look at the numbers, we're spending £600 million on content this year. We're spending £450 million on UK-originated content as defined by Ofcom. Those are our numbers. That's serious firepower in terms of how much original content is on our channel every night. And we'll keep focusing on that. And that's our job. And you can't really worry about the competition in that regard.
Right. So previous management was very much concerned with arguing that Channel 4 was financially unviable. You've taken a different view. But it's also the case that the numbers don't lie, that in 2010, I think you had peak share of 7% main Channel 4. Last year, it was 6.8%. And that's where the numbers are going. What number is going to be too low? 5%?
Well, we focus on the portfolio, which you helped to kick off, because that's what advertisers are ultimately buying into, and increasingly audiences are also moving into an on-demand environment as well. What I mentioned in my speech, and I think increasingly important, is that Channel 4 has a market-leading position in engagement. You know, share is a useful proxy, but what really matters is if you watch a show you're very engaged with, the advertising is going to actually have much more potency, and it can command a good price with the advertisers. So for us, there's a different kind of focus. That's not to say we don't want to remain robust in our portfolio share. We're about 11.5%, and I would like to see that portfolio share stay stable. We've had digital switchover occurring. That's now flattening out. All terrestrials have been in this kind of downward curve for about a decade. We've obviously had the added challenges of Big Brother, and now this year, all of the events that have been on the BBC. But basically, we do see an underlying stability. And I would like to see that continue. And then, you know, economic cycles change. We are competing in a recession. Once that economic climate alters and we're positioned well with the advertisers, I think we could capitalize on that and start building our share again.
It's true, is it not, that a viewer on a digital channel is just worth less than a viewer on an analog channel? It's not a one-for-one thing. Currently,
but the pricing is beginning to get aligned as, you know, so much of the overall audience share has gone into digital. So there are changes in the pricing models that are occurring. There's also, interestingly, a premium in on-demand viewing because it's been less cluttered and there's more engagement. And agencies, they earn a bigger commission producing digital solutions for their clients than they necessarily have done just buying bulk impacts. So there's a change going on in the agencies, and we are moving in a direction of that change.
So I just want you to fantasize a moment. If you didn't have to worry about advertisers at all, what would your Channel 4 look like? How would it be different?
You know, it's a question I find it difficult to answer because I think it's a very good discipline to worry about commercial audiences and to focus in that way. And I'm not sure necessarily that Jay's sitting there making decisions that are being driven entirely by what advertisers want. But I think, you know, one could arguably see, you know, the way that sponsorship works around programming, you know, that would not be there, and then you would probably be, you know, running the schedule in a slightly more, you know, more experimental way, probably going into early peak. I mean, those are some of the areas where you're sort of getting your commercial share and then you're building into prime time, and you could do things quite differently.
But you wouldn't sort of have a party and feel incredibly excited to come to work because the monkey would have been taken off your back.
Well, you could argue the other way. I mean, is the public service remit a monkey also? You know, I mean, you know, I can't really unthink myself from the position that we're in on a daily basis, which is to try and balance those two things out. And moreover, I would say that the attempt to do that on a daily basis is what makes the job interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move on to data. It's something you've become very associated with. I'm just interested to know, what's the most interesting thing you've learned so far from the sign-ups and from data?
I think it's a reminder that we all work in an industry that the public is still unbelievably enthusiastic about. I mean, it's one of the things I was reminded of when I worked in America. You know, people say they love telly, they really love TV, they're really engaged with it, they talk about it a lot. And I think we've gone through a very long period of sort of believing that actually all of the heat was elsewhere when only some of it was elsewhere. So what's remarkable is people's willingness to sign up for an opportunity to engage with the brand, whether it's I'm going to get next week's episode of my favourite show now, whether it's I'll have an opportunity to enter a competition, whether it's I can start personalising my favourites on 4OD. There's a whole series of things which Channel 4 had been doing which were kind of disconnected. And now what we've simply done is join them up so that it recognises your interaction. And this, for me, is a pivotal moment in how broadcasting is evolving. We used to be a medium that was entirely reliant on this box in 5,000 homes that told us at 10 o'clock every morning what was going on.
Right.
On one level, although it's a brilliant system and it's an accurate system and it's one that will be around for a long time to come.
Or everyone chooses to believe it.
Well, no, I think we believe it for a reason. But now we have an extra dimension. And broadcasting has sort of sat back and has said that, you know, up until now, we can't have this direct relationship with our viewer. But the reviewer is bombarding us with their views anyway via other people's platforms, whether it's Twitter or Facebook.
Is it going to make niche, more directional programs more possible?
Potentially, but I think what it'll also do is it'll suddenly, you know, if there is a niche program that really on the barb box is, let's say it's being watched by 300,000 or 400,000 people, that probably is only 4 or 5 people on a barb panel. Whereas now, with our panel, we've actually got 5 million people who are engaging. The number of people who are watching on 4OD who are logged in.
And if those 500,000 people are consumers of luxury automobiles or whatever, you can charge a lot more for them once you know who they are.
Well,
right?
that's potentially what we can do, but from a creative point of view, what we can do is actually know as individuals how often they've come to the channel and what they've been watching that week, and it could affect all sorts of decisions around scheduling, around cross-promotion, around recommendation. So the whole concept of what a TV channel is as a navigational tool that really is imposed on the viewer is starting to bend and alter as we have reverse EPGs, we have different kinds of catch-up services, we have things pinging up on your phone to tell you can record something. All of these things are stretching the way in which the cultural impact of that primary window works.
So in a way, what's interesting about this is that everything that you just talked about might mean, at one level, the death of Channel 4, the television network. But if you own this process going forward, Channel 4 becomes a much more powerful and all-encompassing brand, which travels with you where you go.
It already is that, because 4OD, the digital networks, are already swimming around in people's lives in all sorts of new ways. I don't think the role of the core channel will ever fade in the way that you just implied. I think that it will always provide the first jolt of energy into a creative idea. It's just that it is working now in a much more fragmented environment, but paradoxically, for advertisers, it almost has more potency because the rest of the world is so fragmented. If you try and buy a media campaign and don't use a terrestrial channel, you're really swimming against the tide, even though that terrestrial channel might be smaller than it was 30 years ago. And let's remember, you know, peak ratings on ITV and BBC One 30 years ago were double what they are now.
Right, right. So one thing I'm kind of surprised, or that I don't know that you're doing, maybe you are, but it seems to me that Channel 4 is perfectly placed to be a leader in digital-only content, you know, the Channel 4 version of YouTube's micro channels. A perfect complement to the data strategy that you've just described, a great tryout platform for new ideas. Is that something that you've thought about?
Yeah, and it's already happening. Midnight Beasts, which we ran recently, they emerged entirely through the internet. There are many examples of talent being discovered and creating its energy initially online and coming through. But it's interesting, isn't it, in a world in which some people are arguing that sort of, online channels will replace linear channels, that in actual fact, it's sort of, the flow is still very much the other way. It emerges and then comes into the mainstream. And so it's a different tributary through which creativity can emerge. But yes, we're doing all of those experiments. There's a lot of short form and long form content that you will discover through our various platforms. And it's a sort of two-way street. You can extend the linear franchise through doing that, and you can also discover talent that come back the other way.
I just wanted to ask a couple more questions. One about independence. We've obviously had, over the last 30 years, this incredible and very valuable industrially and creatively to growth in the independent production sector. Through the good offices of PACT, we've had a rights regime which has been incredibly favorable to independents. You know, there's some very rich people walking around as a result of all this. Do you think that job's kind of done? Those companies and new ones are being established all of the time. And should people like yourselves at Channel 4 now be trying to control more rights and look after your own destiny? You know, some of these independents are now, you could argue, more powerful than some channels.
Yeah.
Have you thought about that?
We have, and you know, we're not pursuing a sort of formal redress in terms of how the structure currently works or the terms of trade, because in a sense, sort of evolution is taking care of itself. So many independents become non-qualifying independents, at which point we can transact with them on a level playing field, as it were. So I think that's sort of...
So just to be clear about it, those deals are much more plastic than they once were.
They are, and I think what matters to me is a recognition, and I think that broadcasters perhaps haven't been as strong in arguing this point, of the creative value that the commissioning process can bring to, in some instances. Now, we all know that many of the ideas that we commission are very fully formed and brilliantly authored. But it is also the case that a lot of talent is nurtured over periods of time, and there are also instances where ideas come semi-formed from a commissioner. And in those instances, I think it's only right that that can be recognised in the conversation. But having said that, the system doesn't need intervention in our view. What we're doing is focusing on that next generation of companies in the nations and in the regions, those startup companies, to help them get their first development project with Channel 4. We have a very big and successful Alpha Fund now. We've helped dozens of companies to get their first shows on prime time at Channel 4, and we're looking forward to those companies doing bigger things with us in the future. And if there was sort of a legacy of every chief executive, it should be to say that they helped to shepherd those that new talent and those new companies into formation, and that they go on to do great things elsewhere. And if they make money in the process, that's good too.
Right, and Danny Boyle, as a director, is an amazing example of that. Well, thank you. I mean, just one last question. I wanted to just ask you if there's one Channel 4 program, past, present, or future, that just essentially sums up what you think Channel 4 can be.
I think for me, in the last 12 months, it has been Black Mirror, because I think it has a daring and a mischief, but also a real power to it. And I was really proud and pleased that it won a Rose d'Or, and we're really looking forward to that coming back in a few months' time.
Hopefully in 13 episodes.
We'll see.
Thank you. I have a couple of people to thank. The producers of the session, Alex Connick from Shine and Jason Mills from ITN. Thank you. And I just want to wish you and the channel the best, David, and thank you for taking part in this amateur interrogation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.